Hey, we're here. It's Tuesday night at Shark Tank Live. We have an interesting story of what has happened over the last little bit. We're going to talk about Ole Miss and the New Year's Six. We're going to be talking about a whole bunch of stuff around the program as we get ready for an Egg Bowl coming up in a couple of days. But this is the Shark Tank Live on the Locked On Ole Miss podcast.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, good evening, everybody. I'm joined by Mike Huesmann and Dalen Flowers, and we are going to talk a little bit about the general state of college football, the Ole Miss football program, where it sits, and just a lot of stuff. Dalen Flowers, as everybody knows, is a contributor to the show, and Mike Huesmann is a writer for, is it Mike Farrell Sports?
Yes. Yep.
He covers coaching searches and things like that, but don't worry, we're not bringing him on that for that. He also has a wealth of knowledge on the transfer portal as well. How you doing, Mike?
Doing well. Glad to be back here. It's been probably about a year. Last year around this time is when I believe the last time I was on, so it's good to be back.
Yeah, it's good to have you, buddy. And Dalen, I'm sure you're getting ready to watch the game and put it up on the television so we can do a little watch along a little bit while we're doing this as well, right?
Yes, indeed, my friend. I've got my YouTube TV already up for it.
All right, awesome. I actually have the Florida A&M game on at the moment to make sure that my ESPN SEC Plus is where it needs to be. So, Mike, we're talking like Ole Miss has been the leader for the SEC's third New Year's Six spot for the better part of about 3 weeks now. Missouri is going to jump them because they beat Tennessee, and Ole Miss is going to fall to around 13 or 14 probably when the rankings get released tonight. But this is what I think. I think Ole Miss actually has the advantage for the New Year's Six berth because Georgia is getting ready to run through Tennessee, and Tennessee is going to fall out of the top 25 at that point. And the only top 25 win that Missouri is going to have is the one over Kansas State. Ole Miss beat LSU, who beat Missouri, and Ole Miss has a win over Tulane, and their only two losses are to Alabama and Georgia. What say you, man?
I think you're right about that. When it all is said and done at the end of the regular season, I expect Ole Miss to jump back over them because even if Mizzou wins their last two games, Florida and Arkansas, neither of which is very impressive. So I think you hit the nail on the head that Mizzou will jump them now, rightfully so. They're having a heck of a year, but Ole Miss is going to be more impressive over a 12-game body of work that we will see in 2 weeks.
Yeah, whenever you have a situation like the playoff rankings, we all know what the playoff committee did to TCU 10 years ago, to where TCU was in the top four. They didn't play for a conference championship, and TCU ended up not making it.
Yeah.
The same thing's going to happen to the New Year's Six. Once the conference championship and you see that total body of work, when they change over to the total body, I think Ole Miss is going to have the advantage because honestly, Ole Miss has the better resume than Missouri. Dalen, what surprises are you looking forward? What do you think is going to happen on tonight's college football playoff rankings?
I want to see just how far they may drop us. And I honestly say that because, a couple weeks ago, OU had their loss to Kansas and they still were ranked ahead of us. I would like to see what kind of resume and body of work they look at now that we've lost the game. I would like us to not fall too far. I think we're around that 12-11 range now, but what do the committee see in terms of how we lost, but in terms of the rest of our wins this season? How do they place us against Oregon State, Louisville as well, Missouri? How do they place us within those teams? Now, I expect us to gain momentum in these final 2 weeks for that. But I would like to see how the committee ranks body of work because, again, we've had one of the toughest schedules so far throughout the entire country. And I think that builds advantages for us in terms of, where other teams may rank in front of us or behind us.
Yeah, and it's also important to remember in that 2014 year, Ole Miss got beat 30-0 to a relatively bad Arkansas team on the road. and still went to a New Year's Six bowl at 9-3. So that game against the Georgia Bulldogs, that is in no way going to be disqualifying, because at the end of the day, when you're looking at resumes between Missouri and Georgia, you're going to see an L in that game by Missouri's column, and you're going to see an L by Ole Miss's column. That's just not going to matter, in my opinion. What do you think, Mike?
Another one interesting that, Dalen brought up all those teams. How Ole Miss will be ranked in respect to Penn State is also interesting. They are another one-loss team who lost to another prospective playoff team in Michigan, and they're going to be up there. So I'll be curious to see Ole Miss, Penn State, where they're ranked in respect to each other.
Yeah, I think we have. Honestly, if you said, hey, Steve, you can put $25 down. You have to bet on one bowl game, and it's a certain matchup. And I honestly think the matchup that is most likely for Ole Miss to get is the Peach Bowl versus Penn State. I think that is the game that we need to watch. Now, everybody is prognosticating Ole Miss to the Citrus Bowl, which selfishly I'm all for. That's 50 miles down the road from my house. And it's right next to the Under Armour game, and I can just make a week of it and have a good time. But I do think the Peach Bowl against Penn State, I think that is Ole Miss's fate. Dalen, what matchup in bowl games are you looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to that, honestly. I think that's going to be a really fun game, and I think it's a game that puts us against a team that is kind of very similar in ways to us. They Penn State have recruited very well, and they've developed a really good team over the last couple of years under James Franklin, but they've kind of ceased to win those big games, as we've seen their 2 losses this year against Michigan, Ohio State, and we're kind of in that essence too. We've developed really well, but we've ceased to beat those 2 teams in our conference, of course, Bama and Georgia this year. That I think we were right below. I think Penn State has one of the 5 best defenses in the country, and I think that will be a phenomenal matchup with our offense against their defense, and how Charlie and Lane kind of sees to match up. How Caden Prescorn plays against that type of linebacking defense. How do we use the run game effectively, and also how does our defense match up against their offense? Their passing game has been a little stale over the last couple of weeks, but I think their running game has developed to kind of be a respectable run game for their offense. And I would love to see how Pete, kind of implements something to stop that run game, because I think that's kind of been a big asterisk for our defense this season, just kind of stop and run against opposing teams.
Mike, the one bowl matchup that everybody is prognosticating at the moment that is just absolutely gross, though, is the Citrus Bowl prognostications they're doing against the Iowa Hawkeyes. And it would be interesting to see Ole Miss's offense against that defense, but that was just gross, man.
Bet the under in that game. Bet the under. That's all I have to say. Because they would force Dart. They would force Dart to beat him. Judkins would be largely ineffective in that game, just because everybody is against Iowa. They're almost impossible to run against.
Which is absolutely crazy. It's weird that offense just can't be good. I guess they're so make the defense and sacrifice for the defense.
That's it. It is the way they play. They're going to get you into a chess match, and Kirk is basically going to boil it down to, you are going to make a mistake before we will, and then we will capitalize on it.
Yeah, but if for some reason, if Ole Miss got into that game, that Citrus Bowl, and they played against the Iowa Hawkeyes and they had 17 points in the first half, it's over. It's a ball game.
Yes.
Strike up the band. That's like that would be the equivalent of a 38-0 halftime to a normal team.
Conversely, if they would have a bad turnover and Iowa gets up by 10, it's also over, because you're not going to make that up against Iowa.
It's so weird. Yeah. It's so bizarre. So let's talk a little bit about coaching carousel. And like I said, I'm not doing the Lane stuff or anything like that, but this is just general what's going on. Let's talk about the Mississippi State opening.
Let's talk about
they got rid of Zach Arnett after 10 games. And this is like just a few years away from getting rid of Joe Moorhead after 2 years.
Yeah.
There's a history there. And they're starting to look at candidates who might be willing to take that job. And I don't know if anybody that is up and coming would do it. So I think they're either overly ambitious coordinator that's trying to skip a step, or maybe a retread. I think that is where Mississippi State is at.
Well, we had a relatively big name who's an up-and-comer tweet today, and his location was in Starkville, Mississippi, and that was Jamie Chadwell from Liberty.
That the tweet was fake.
Oh, was it?
Yes, that tweet was fake.
See, even one of our bosses said that they thought it was legit.
Yeah, it had like the drop arrow thing on there, and most of those tweets don't have them or something like that.
Okay, I'm not as familiar with that, but that makes sense.
But that would be the dumbest thing ever, though, to leave your location services on.
Yeah, I do think you may have hit the nail on the head with A, retread, B, up-and-comer, because I think their top two candidates now both fit those camps. Barry Odom at UNLV failed at Mizzou. He inherited a bad situation in his defense, but he is doing wonders at UNLV. Nobody's won there. And in his first season there, they're going to play in the conference title game. The other up-and-comer that I think could be on the radar is a former Ole Miss assistant, John Sumrall, who's doing great things at Troy. They're having a heck of a year. And I could see both of those two being in the mix. I think another guy, so I was at South Carolina last year. I'm a professor at Marshall this year. Charles Huff is another former Mississippi State assistant. Marshall's been a weird team this year, but his name, he'd been a Saban assistant. He'd been at Mississippi State. The elephant in the room for this one is Dan Mullen. Everybody brings his name up. I don't like it. He's a good X's and O's coach. He will coach again. I don't like him to go back there because his deficiencies were recruiting, talent acquisition. He was good X's and O's wise, but he couldn't get talent in there, especially at Florida. Now, Mississippi State's already behind the conference in NIL and transfer portal scenarios. You bring him in a situation where they're already behind. I don't see it working and them getting better. What do you guys think about that?
I agree totally. I think, honestly, Ole Miss fans should root for them to hire Dan Mullen because it's a potential disaster that could set their program even further back than it is right now. I think the name that I don't know any rumors about this, but a name that is just on my head and on my mind at the moment, I think everybody should pay attention to Manny Diaz.
So I wrote an article for Farrell yesterday. Diaz was one of the five, the only one I haven't mentioned yet. So former D coordinator there, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. It's one of those things. He's got the energy. He can do some of the stuff that can compete with Lane to make Mississippi State seem cooler than it is. And I mean, Manny Diaz is the inventor of the turnover chain, for instance. So Manny Diaz, as everybody knows, is the son of a former mayor of Miami. So he's very good in the public light. He's very good in front of a crowd. He's very familiar with what's going on. He obviously has a good idea of marketing. I think that will be important because the reality of what's going on at Mississippi State, and they're going to get this fixed. They're going to do it, but they were behind the ball getting their NIL camp together. And in this day and age, if you don't have NIL, you have trouble recruiting. If you can't recruit, you're going to sink down as the conference goes. And Mississippi State just figured that out a couple of years too late. And then they had the catastrophe that happened with Coach Leach. And then they made the emotional hire with Zach Arnett. And right now, the athletic director of Mississippi State is like, no, we've got to do something right now, because if we don't, and Texas and Oklahoma gets in the league and all of this stuff changes, all of a sudden we could be like, Vandy without the degree. And so this is kind of a last gasp thing, Mike, I think, that Mississippi State is dealing with.
Yeah. But another guy I could see being in the mix that we're hearing more and more, Rhett Lashley, SMU, has was O coordinator at a lot of big schools before. We're hearing his name come up. The new Mississippi State athletic director, new this year, in fact, was longtime assistant AD at Oklahoma. So keep that in the back of your mind. I don't think Jeff Levy would be a candidate for this job, but he will become a head coach eventually. We'll see where and when.
I get this is just me guessing and me reading the tea leaves when it comes to Jeff Levy. I think his relationship at Oklahoma is strained, and there might be an exit strategy that Jeff Levy is trying to hit. That might be another name to watch in this situation.
Yeah, and I think for him, the more likely scenario wouldn't be that he gets this job. It would be that a guy like Lashley gets it and Levy goes to a G5 program first as a head coach. But you never know with him.
Yeah, Levy'd be that coordinator that took the Mississippi State job by skipping steps along the way. And maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't. I
do think another coordinator to keep your eye, it could be Glenn Schumann at Georgia. He's another guy that's getting brought up.
That one is interesting to me. The only reason I say that, he's obviously Kirby Smart's defensive coordinator, who is basically notorious as the Saban assistant that wouldn't take another job. And he just waited until the Georgia job came open. And Dan Lanning, the same thing, had offers out there, waited until Oregon came open.
Venables was like that when he was at Clemson, waiting for
that is how Schumann strikes me on this. And I think, whenever you look at the Mississippi State job, like Jamie Chadwell, everybody, that was the big rumor today. Jamie Chadwell. Jamie Chadwell, I don't think is going to Mississippi State because he can wait 2 years and end up at Clemson. And he would be a perfect fit
extremely well
at Clemson.
Too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jamie Chadwell at Clemson is basically Dabo 2.0. So that's interesting. Also, by the way, rumor came out today on On3 that UCLA is looking at potentially firing Chip Kelly after the USC game, which whoever released this, that is the most sabotage thing I've ever heard. I mean, that is somebody that has an axe to grind with Chip Kelly and wants him to get beat by USC. And with USC's defense, that's going to be difficult to begin with. But I mean, that's weird because now you have a situation where Chip Kelly, if he wins the game against USC, I mean, that's going to be an awkward Monday.
Sure will be. And Chip is one of those guys, like you had mentioned, he grinds on people. And I think wherever he goes, he's going to make enemies and maybe not last long. This is his 6th year there. He was pretty poor his first 2 years. He inherited a bad situation, but they won 3 and 4 games quite a few years in a row. 3, and then they won 9 the last couple of years, which is better than the people before him had done that. I used this phrase with UCLA recently. It's a tough place to win. That should be an easy place to win. Mm-hmm. For whatever reason, a lot of people have struggled to win there. And maybe they just want to get him out of there, but maybe he also thinks it's run its course here. Maybe I'll go somewhere where I'm going to be more appreciated too. So I don't know that feelings would be too hard on either side if he's not there anymore.
Now, silly question, okay? But let's say this happens. Chip Kelly says, I'm done. Chip Kelly to Mississippi State?
I don't hate it. They could do a lot worse than him, to be honest. Yeah.
I mean, we talk about a retread of what's going on. Dalen, that makes a little bit of sense, man.
I think it does. I think that, you sometimes in these coaching situations, you want to say, well, let's give a coach patience. Let's give him some time. But you got to think about it in the era we're in now, like you talked about the NIL, the transfer, and also OU and Texas coming in. There's really no time. There's no patience for teams to be lackluster anymore if they want to compete in the football world. I think that's why you even look at Arkansas fans. I think that's why they're kind of up in the air with Sam Pittman being there now. How do we continue to progress in this world of football if our coaches are still leaning with their tactics that are 15, 10 years old? The things that, worked, a couple of years ago, even decades ago, they can't work now. So how do you develop a system that gets you in immediately and gets you results immediately? But also you have to think about this, when you're at a job like anywhere in the SEC, but especially the West, it's hard to win games simple. You're playing against teams that are, competing at a high level every week, but also recruiting. Their coaches are top notch. And it's not easy to just come out there and muster, 9-10 wins every season. So when you get a job like that, whoever gets that job, they're going to be faced with a lot of circumstances, but it's how they use their resources positively that I would like to assess their job. How do they recruit well? How do they keep players that they think are better here than instead of transferring? How do they do those things instead of just coming out and winning games? Because it's not going to be that easy in a situation like that.
Yeah, and Dalen, I just want to ask the question: do you think Sam Pittman gets another year?
Just speaking to people up there, I think he does, and that's just my honest opinion. Do I think he deserves it? Honestly, I hate to say this because I love P. I love what he's done. I just don't think he does. I just think that what we've seen this year and even last year, it's just been I think he's reached his high point. I think 2021 was a great year. Those 9 wins, beat Penn State in the Gator Bowl. I think he's reached his high point, and he got the program out of a very horrible situation, and he brought us back to some relevancy. But I don't think he can reach past this point where he has reached it. Now, at that same point, who do they go after? There's a lot of options out there, honestly. But I think just hearing from news media, I think right now they're going to give him another year, and if he doesn't execute next year, then I think he will be out of Fayetteville, unfortunately. But I think that time has come, and I think Hunter Yurchak is understanding, what I have to do for my program is what's best, and I don't think that right now that's Sam Pittman anymore.
Yeah, it gets to a point, I think, in college football programs, and not just where it gets stale, but it gets to a point where you can't fix it. You can't turn it around. Because there's a certain level of buy-in that is kind of that event horizon. And if you ever drop below that, you will never be back above that. And I'm curious to see what the game against the FIU that Arkansas plays. I'm curious to see how many people actually show up to that game.
Yeah.
I'm glad that, Dalen, you brought up that like the news media there is saying he'll get another year. I am 100% with you. Like, I hope he does. Like, I don't know if he deserves it, but I actually hope he gets another year, because I was going into this show thinking, this week, thinking he probably was going to be gone. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. See, the thing with Sam is, and even like, I would attest to what kind of Dabo Swinney has said this year. They have a certain mentality, and it's hard to break them out of that mentality. And so they have not really utilized the new resources they have in today's college football world to actually be better than they can be. So I think that's one of the big problems with Sam is, he just is kind of real old school and hasn't been able to kind of break out of that old school shell.
Yeah.
Hey, we got a question from Madison Book. It says the odds we as I'm assuming Ole Miss, because it's in the avatar, we go to the Cotton Bowl unforeseen, unexpectedly. I think honestly that is actually pretty good. I think there is a scenario to where Ole Miss and Missouri make it into the Access Bowl, and if that happens, one of them is going to go to the Cotton and one of them is going to go to the Peach. And if that happens, you're going to have the Peach and the Cotton Bowl fighting over Ole Miss, because their fans they'll drink whatever town they're in dry.
Yeah, I'm not mad with either one of those. I told you that a couple weeks ago, but especially about the Cotton Bowl. I think, fans will travel really well, and I think they'll enjoy either the Peach Bowl, Atlanta, or Dallas, and I think they'll enjoy really well because our fans have really stepped up this year in terms of traveling for the team. So I'm happy with either one of those situations for us.
Yeah, Cotton Bowl would be 6 hours from the Mississippi border, because it's from Vicksburg, 6 hours. Atlanta and the Peach Bowl is about 6 hours from Meridian and the other side of the state. So it is 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. And the third option is Disney World, and you can't really go wrong with that either. That's, like I said, that's 50 minutes from my house. Okay, guys. My wife is actually moderating the chat right now, and she's the voice of God. And she does that. So today I was supposed to interview Bill Flowers. Okay. And we were waiting on Bill Flowers to do his interview, and Bill had to delay for some reason. I get a phone call from my wife. She's like, Steve, I've locked myself out of the car. Can you come down to Bartow and help me out? And we tried to figure it out, and I'm trying to piece together the Bill Flowers thing and all that. And then eventually, drove down there to let her back in. And I'm like, okay, Becky, I need to understand what happened. How did you lock your keys in the car whenever you have a key fob? How did that happen? And she's like, oh, I don't remember. And I'm like, oh, no. We're not doing that game. We're going to have to step by step through this if you're going to play that game. Well, this is what happened. At the end of the day, my wife went down to her car. It was raining, because it was raining all day in Bartow. And she got into the car and realized she forgot her phone. So she panicked when she got out of the truck, because she was going to leave her purse in there, and she locked the door and shut the door. went and ran to get somebody to let her back in the building because she works in a government building. So they let her back in. She goes in and gets her phone. When she comes back down, she realizes the keys are left on the front seat. So what we have is a series of repeatedly just like worse events that happened that caused my wife to stand out in the rain in the middle of a government parking lot, and nobody helped her at all. And of course, every other time a year, it gets dark at 8 o'clock in Florida. Now it's getting dark at 5:30. And it was an unbelievable, unfortunate event. I feel for my wife on that one. I'm glad she's okay. But that's what I was doing immediately before the stream day one.
You're good. I was wondering where you were. I got on a couple minutes early. I was like, is Steven good? I need to send him a text. I was just making sure you're all good, though, man.
Yeah, the traffic was absolutely nuts. Yeah, so that happened. So between 5:30 and like 7:15, that's what I was doing to get that done, because of the traffic in this town is absolutely nuts. Oh, and my wife said, the voice of God, for the record, I've never forgotten my phone or locked the keys in the car. 900 mosquito bites. Welcome to Florida, Beck. Welcome to Florida. So, all right. So we're moving into this weekend. So we're entering into about a 9-day period to where it's just really interesting. First of all, I can't believe that this football season's almost over, this regular season. I mean, the fact that we're 9 days away roughly from Ole Miss doing that. But I think this is an interesting situation because of what we talked about earlier in the show, Mike, and Ole Miss needing style points a little bit and being in a beauty contest with Missouri. I do feel sorry for Louisiana Monroe, who has the second longest active losing streak in FBS. And I kind of feel sorry for Mississippi State because Ole Miss needs to score and win these games handily.
Yeah, and for ULM, it doesn't matter. Terry Bowden is safe there, and they're happy with how he's doing. So they're doing this game to get a paycheck, and that's what it is, and that's okay. You got to fund all your sports and everything you're doing, and that's why we do these things.
Oh, by the way, somebody put out a list, and it had the athletic budgets for every team in the Sun Belt on Twitter. And then they put on there how much is owed to Jimbo Fisher in the next 60 days, and that was more money than the entire Sun Belt's athletic budget.
So speaking of ULM, if you look at a list of all the FBS head coaches, the public ones, the private ones don't have to disclose the salaries, but Terry Bowden is by far the lowest, and he's making about half as much as the guy who's the second lowest. He's not even making $400,000 a year. Everybody else is over $650,000.
To put that in perspective, Terry Bowden's making about $400,000 a year, and if you are let's say you're the tight ends coach at Ole Miss, or whoever the lowest paid assistant is on Ole Miss's staff, you're probably making somewhere in the neighborhood of $600,000.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's absolutely nuts. Now good for Monroe. I mean, they were the ultimate slump buster, by the way, for Southern Mississippi, because Southern Miss was terrible. And then all of a sudden they played Southern ULM, and they not only beat them, but now they're scoring 40 points a game. And I think they have a legitimate shot Saturday.
I'll be curious how they do Saturday and then next week, because the MO is that Will Hall was probably going to lose his job. Now they're looking pretty good the last couple of weeks, so that might change.
No. I think whenever he gave away the play calling to the assistant, they've got a lot of better. Beer Cans and Batty says nobody can beat the mighty Georgia Bulldogs. Nobody is going to beat the Georgia Bulldogs this year. Nope. If they play like they did against Ole Miss the other night, nobody is beating that team. You can line Michigan up, Ohio State up. You'll find out shortly with Alabama. Nobody is beating that team. Offensively, that's the thing that was the really cool thing, because we've all seen the Georgia defenses and how they play. But offensively, that was a different looking unit than I've seen Kirby have.
I don't think they can play as well as they did every game, though, either against Ole. they played really well against Ole Miss. I don't think they can do it every game.
Yeah, I think they are going to probably sleepwalk through, but beat Tennessee. And they're going to save it up. They're going to beat Georgia Tech by 30 points.
Yeah.
And then they're going to be up for Alabama. And then we're ready for the playoff. And once that happens, I mean, Georgia's going to end up – I'm looking forward to Georgia versus Florida State. I got a feeling that's the matchup that we're going to get in the first round. And I want to see that Georgia offensive line against that Florida State defensive line.
I think Michigan is the biggest threat to Georgia. The problems they pose running the ball, statistically, that would be the matchup I'd like to see.
Yeah, I think that's the one they're going to finagle that to where it's the national championship game. I think they actually are. Just real quick, I need to set this up to where the game's on. Check out the Detroit Mercy versus Ole Miss Rebels game. Detroit Mercy's lost like both their games by like 30 points, I think. So I do not have high hopes for them. Dalen, the Tennessee mustard throwers will get crushed this weekend. This is from our Beer Cans and Baddies, our resident Georgia fan. Talk about how you think this game is going to go, because I genuinely think that Georgia just is going to suffocate them.
Yeah, I think Tennessee hasn't really found an identity this year, and I think that's been one of their main causes. They haven't been able to get the run game going. They haven't been able to get Joe Milton going, and I think Josh Heupel hasn't really found a developed answer against these teams. And I think what we saw from Georgia this weekend is their mix of schemes, especially on the defensive line, is going to cause Tennessee a lot of troubles offensively. And I don't think that, Georgia's really going to be phased this weekend. I think, it's going to be I think Tennessee will give them a run for their money in the first quarter, but I think after that, Georgia will kind of kick it up a notch and just show their power over Tennessee. But I think it'll be a fun game. I think we'll get to see what type of players step up for Georgia in terms of the long run. I think this would be a big game for those type of players for Georgia against Tennessee.
Yeah, it's one of those games that, honestly, I just think it could get weird for Tennessee. I think it's going to be the game that they want it so bad. Mike, have you ever seen like the Looney Tunes cartoon? I think it was Gossamer and everything. He just squeezes it and he's like, I'm going to love you and squeeze you and call you Georgia. Yeah. And that's what Tennessee is going to do in this game. And because of that, they're going to press, and Georgia's just going to take them in and suffocate them. I honestly think that.
Yeah, especially like Dalen said, second half, I think Georgia pulls away there. So Georgia's been pretty bad against the spread this year. They've only covered 3 of their games. This week is a 10-point spread. I think Georgia covers it in this one. So, yeah, I think they turn it on in the second half and pull away. I expected probably maybe like last week, 45-20, something like that.
Yeah, and everybody says, well, at least Tennessee scored 20 points, and it's like, no, that's not how the game went.
No.
I am interested to see like the Florida-Missouri game, and I do think Missouri is going to beat Florida. Don't hear me wrong. I do think they're going to win that game, but I am interested to see if Florida has a pulse, because Florida has to get a win against either Missouri or Florida State to be bowl eligible. To even be Birmingham eligible, they need to get this win probably, because they're probably not going to get the one against Florida State, Dalen.
Yeah, excuse my head down. I'm looking at the basketball game, but I agree with you, man. I think, if you look at these 2 games for Florida, who's their best chance? I think it's Mizzou right now. And I don't say that just in terms of Mizzou's not a good team. I just think, Florida State is a much tougher opponent for them right now in terms of how schemes match up. But I think Florida also has to be hungry, because if Billy Napier is talking to his team this week, what is he implementing in them? I think right now he has struggled all season because he doesn't have trust and confidence in his players. And I think that kind of correlates. If you don't have trust and confidence in your players, and your players aren't going to have trust and confidence in you. And we'll see how that works out this weekend. I'm a big fan of Eli Drinkwitz, and I think he's kind of put Mizzou in a position now where there's no looking back for him and his program. And so I think that it's going to be a fun game, but I think Mizzou will keep it. I think Florida will keep it close, but I think Mizzou will fight out a tough win for them. But Florida definitely has their backs up against the wall this weekend. I know they shouldn't even be in this position. They shouldn't have lost to Arkansas, but I'll take my Hog win over a couple weeks ago. But they shouldn't be in this position, so they have to find some type of answer to try and pull out a win this weekend.
So, Mike, you had something you wanted to say about that.
About the Florida Mizzou?
Yeah.
Just that. I again agree with Dale on that. They're going to see this game as the path to a bowl game. Florida State is looking like it might be a bridge too far for them. And I don't think Billy is on the hot seat, despite what a lot of people say. You are hearing rumors. I don't think those people really know what they're talking about. He's going to get to year 3. Now, their schedule's a bear next year, and he's going to be on the hot seat next year. But the other thing to look at, and this was brought to my attention yesterday, among the potential 5-win teams, Florida's APR is actually really high. So they potentially could get to a bowl game with only 5 wins like Rice did last year. But you're not going to be waiting on that, especially with the JMU team and Jacksonville State, who may pip you to that if they get their waivers.
Yeah, and they should get their waivers. James Madison should get their waiver. This is a team that is about to throw up a 12-0, about to be a Sun Belt champ. I mean, they deserve to play in that Sun Belt championship game.
Yeah, and that's you're right. They won't even get to play in the conference championship game.
Yeah. It's absolutely nuts. Dalen, this weekend, what are you looking forward to? And you can't say a double box of Ole Miss and Louisiana Monroe and Mississippi State and Southern. You can't say that.
What am I looking forward to this weekend? In general or Ole Miss wise?
Just in general.
I want to see how A&M looks this weekend. Of course, Jimbo's gone now. How does this team kind of respond to that noise? Of course, they haven't had the best season, but they've gotten that chance now to get to a bowl game, and let's see how those players kind of react to what's been going on all week and kind of react to that noise. Now, I think the way that A&M plays the rest of this year helps whatever coach comes in kind of recruit better, because, of course, you want to go to a winning program. But I think also A&M needs to continue to push whatever coach they have right now, so whoever does come in can build off something instead of something lingering that is not a positive situation right now. Now, although it's not the best situation, it's not rock bottom. But I want to see what A&M is looking like this week. I think it's going to be an easy game for them, but it can also be one of those games like we saw a couple of years ago when they lost to Appalachia State. Never be able to put your head down and just kind of ease over these teams because you have a lot of things going on. So how do they respond to kind of all the noise going on this week? I think that'll be something fun for them.
Hey, Mike, this question is from Jay Cannon. He says, who do you think A&M will finally get since a lot of big-name coaches are turning down being considered? Now, Mike, I think that this search, A&M always goes back and forth. They go big-name coach, Texas coach, big-name coach, Texas coach, just back and forth with that. I think that either Mike Elko or Jeff Traylor is going to end up being the head man at A&M.
So, if they go Texas guy, definitely Traylor. If they go other big name, Elko or Kalen DeBoer, I think it would be one of those two. And you couldn't go wrong with either of them. Yeah, I do wonder in the new era, portal, NIL, they may not go back to that Texas history as they have done in the past. Who knows? But I think if they could get DeBoer or Elko, you take that and you give them whatever they want. But Traylor was also in my top 5 that I wrote about. So he's done very well at UTSA, and he has all kinds of connections there. So either one of those.
Beer Cans and Baddies said the Nick Saban retirement party will take place on December 2nd at the SEC championship game. He's obviously a Georgia fan, but Nick Saban has alternated between looking like a kinder, gentler Nick Saban, and also he's been digging deep. This is probably one of his best coaching jobs.
Yeah.
Think he walks away?
I don't. Not this year.
I don't either. I think he has a couple more years in his bag.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with y'all on that one. But it's an interesting situation. Now, this basketball game, I think Ole Miss is it 8-0 or 10-0?
I was
8-0. Okay.
Yeah.
At the first time out. So Ole Miss's basketball team is actually doing quite well. I'm pretty excited about that. All right. ULM, the goal for ULM, Mike. I think this is a situation. If Jackson Dart plays more than one series in the third quarter, there's probably a failure, right?
That might be a little bit much, but I wouldn't expect him to play into the fourth quarter, hopefully. And it depends on how much you want to play the backups too, especially with that short break. I did want to ask something related to that. Egg Bowl. Is it Thanksgiving or Black Friday?
Thanksgiving.
It is okay. So you have the shorter. You don't want him and Judkins, especially playing into the fourth quarter, and any of your regulars for that matter. But
I think I think Ole Miss wants Walker Howard to get the fourth quarter in this game, and I think they want Spencer Sanders to get the third. Yeah. And you get Jackson Dart in there to knock some rust off, to have him feel good, have some success. I think that should be the plan at the quarterback position.
It should be, yeah.
I agree, because we talked about this on Monday. When do coaches kind of decide that, we got to see Walker out there a little bit more to get him some more execution out on the actual field for next season? So, yeah, I think that's the right move right now.
Yeah, and it should be really interesting indeed. But anyway, Mike, we're going to follow the basketball game. We appreciate you stopping by, and I hope we can do it again sometime, man.
Absolutely, yeah. Feel free. Obviously, the coaching carousel is going to heat up here in a couple weeks, and be glad to be on. Dalen, it's nice to meet you.
You too.
Yeah,
and tell them what you have going on at your site and where they can find your stuff, man.
So you can see my X/Twitter handle up here, Huesmann CFB, and I'll do a lot of coaching lists at this point. So, jobs open up and 5 names, and then for some, most of the bigger jobs, I'll keep updating that. I do a weekly coaches hot seat, which we haven't had this much action and change on it all year, just because of all the guys that actually got fired. And then, Penn State offensive coordinator gets fired. We'll do stuff for assistant coordinators as well, and, all kinds of assorted coaching lists. So, please give me a follow. I would like that.
Yeah, and he also knows a lot about the transfer portal. He's the one that called John Saunders almost immediately, and that turned out to be a pretty good find as well. So thank you, Mike, and we will talk to you a little bit later, bud.
Take care, you guys. See ya.
All right, Dalen. It's just you and me now. All right. Beacons and Batty says Arch Manning will hit the portal for Ole Miss. You say that, but this quarterback room is so stacked that probably would not be the most smart thing for Arch Manning to do.
Yeah, I honestly, this is just me speaking, and I don't think he will transfer. I think he really is focused on playing for Steve Sarkisian, whether that's in his junior year or whatever. I don't think he's going to transfer. I think he's kind of set on playing at UT, and I know that might take him another year or two, and I think he's kind of okay with that. I think he's kind of back there learning the system better, but I don't think he's going to transfer. And if he does, I don't think he'll come here. Unfortunately, I think we have a quarterback room for the next couple of years. I think we're kind of content with, and I don't think he's going to look at this as to be one of his destination spots.
Yeah, it's. I think it'll be. I don't think Arch Manning will ever take a snap at Ole Miss. I honestly think that bridge is kind of burned a little bit. But I mean, with the quarterbacks that Ole Miss has currently, that's not really not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah. We got Joe, the voice of God with a Texas is not UT, sir. Somebody is obviously from Tennessee.
Well, I'm from Arkansas. UT was more of if Texas is more of my hated rival, and I also watched a lot of OU growing up, especially with Lincoln Riley being there. and had some family correlation with him. I always referred to Texas UT, so I never really got the UT about Tennessee, honestly, until I came to school here. It was the first time I ever heard it. So that UT Tennessee notion is really new to me. So UT is Texas for me. I'm sorry, Miss Becky.
Yeah. But the argument that cannot get beaten, and Texas people are going to try and make it, but they cannot win this. But the University of Tennessee was a school before Texas was a thing. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, you do have that. We're talking like, 50 years before the Alamo happened, Tennessee was a state.
Yeah.
So, we got some hustle. Ole Miss is going on. They got a 7-point win or 7-point lead at the moment. They're about to hit the under 12 timeout in a moment as well. Jay Cannon says Ole Miss 70, State 3. I wish that would be the most awesome. We just beat the hell out of you at the end of the game ever. I think we both know that that's not going to happen. So should be pretty good. Anyway, we're going to wrap it up very much. Ole Miss basketball is doing pretty well. We're going to watch that. Obviously, there's no post-game show on that. We're going to start that after football season ends, doing postcast around basketball. But if there's a game on Tuesday, we're going to have it because we do it about 7:30. Every Tuesday, we do Shark Take Live. So we thank you for tuning in, and tune in next week. And we've got a whole bunch of stuff coming up. So subscribe to the podcast if you haven't, to the YouTube page. If you have, please tell a friend. And if you are listening on one of the other mediums, go over to the YouTube page and subscribe as well. Dalen Flowers is starting up his new podcast with a new season this coming year. Stay on the lookout for that. He'll be able to advertise it on his show as well. And Joel Nichols says real quick, I want to point out, Stephen, I fully expect Ole Miss to get that revenge that you spoke of in regard to Mississippi State on Thanksgiving. Yeah, I think this is the game that is actually revenge. 2017, the mayor of Starkville, that was great, but this game is actually the revenge game. This is the one where the check comes due. So it should be interesting to see. Anyway, Dalen, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we will see everybody tomorrow. Take care. Hotty toddy.